Last year was a really big year for speed boots. A ton of stuff got released and loads of stuff that was like the brand's pinnacle, the best they've ever done. We had the Puma Ultra Drop, we had the New Balance Furon V6 Pro, both of those potentially that brand's best ever boot. We've still got the Vapor 13, Superfly 7 on the market. Adidas dropped the Ghosted with this incredible tooling, and Umbro already have the Velocita V, which I must say was a boot I was pretty excited about when I initially saw the images because it looked like something a little bit different. It looked very interesting, and you know what? Umbro don't get enough credit for what they do. They're a very good brand that's had to have a bit of a struggle back to the top. If you don't know, short story, Nike bought Umbro, took all the stuff off them, Nike sold the Umbro name, and now Umbro are trying to basically get back to where they once were as an absolute pinnacle of sporting retailers. They used to make the England kits, they used to have Michael Owen, John Terry, Roberto Carlos, all of these players used to wear Umbro boots, like pretty big names. So this, for me, is the big one. Any brand's speed boot is where they have to compete these days just because of popularity. So is the Velocita V any good? We're gonna find out. Remember to like the video, get subscribed to the channel, of course, and let's crack her open. We'll start with the upper because there's some interesting stuff going on here. And what you've got is primarily a two-layer construction. You have memory flex, which is the material in the mid layer. So it's underneath this top black TPU coating, which has this hexagonal shape in the front of it. So this area here is designed to give all of the structure, whereas the memory flex, which is the mid-layer material, which feels a little like a neoprene, if I'm being honest, that is designed to hug your foot and adapt to the shape of your foot. A lot of what this boot is about is trying to get it to adapt and mold and shape to your foot. The way that this works kind of reminds me of what Under Armour were doing with the Clutch Fit line, where you had a super stretchy inner sock that didn't really have too much in the way of structure and would have led to quite a disappointing performing football boot because obviously no structure means that you don't get any stability, the lockdown would be terrible, the responsiveness would be terrible, just isn't what you want. And then they put Clutch Fit on top of that to allow that material to then stretch out around your foot and hold shape. And that's kind of what Umbro have gone for here, but it's just a simpler idea. It's a much simpler top TPU coating with that memory flex upper on the inside, which, like I say, kind of just feels like a neoprene. It's very soft and it definitely does mold around your foot. There's no break-in time on this boot at all. It is ready to go out of the box, but the TPU does break in even further as you're using the boot. The hexagonal pattern that you can see runs pretty much the entirety of the boot, especially in this forefoot area, and it's just there to give you extra flexibility so that TPU top coating doesn't make the upper stiff. But you can see that it covers a huge area on the front of the boot. The upside to this being you get a massive clean striking surface all the way around the boot, which is very, very nice. And it is a little on the slick side. I haven't necessarily had any problems, but when it gets wet, it lacks a little bit. It could do with a little bit of texture or grip in there because it's not really provided by these hexagonal elements, which are just cutouts. They don't do anything in that way. And then because of the depth of this and the size of that striking surface, you get a very shallow lacing system, which reminds me of what New Balance did with the Furon V1. You see this very shallow lacing system and a huge strike zone. Now, if you like the big striking surface, great. However, I think there's a trade-off. A lacing system that's this shallow really does mean that the adjustability of the boot is limited. You don't get the ability to really tighten this boot down all the way down the boot. And while the Memory Flex wraps to your foot quite well and the TPU top layer does a decent job, I would like to have more adjustability here to be able to really lock myself in place. I feel that it does hurt the lockdown of the boot and in turn the responsiveness of the boot by having such a short lacing system. This is of course an entirely one-piece upper, as you can see, and interestingly, the point at which the boot meets, the material, the one-piece meets, is actually at a seam around this side here, which is far enough out of the way that it doesn't affect anything like touch on the ball. It's just an odd place to have the seam based on what we usually expect. The seam is usually kind of hidden away, or it's in this area where the boot is joined, because this is actually, again, you can see that it's joined in this area a little bit where it has strengthening for the laces, but it is a genuine one-piece upper with the seam here. That you can feel that on the inside of the boot if you run your finger in here. However, it doesn't bother you when you're playing at all. And Umbro, by the sounds of things and the feel of things, have actually put quite a lot of work into getting a decent, comfortable heel counter and feeling in this. There's a decent amount of padding, which reminds me a little of the Adidas X in the way that it's kind of shaped in two pods, but it's definitely not as pronounced as that, and the lockdown's not as good as what you got with the X 19.1. However, it's decent and it's a nice deep heel counter, which really does help. As I've already mentioned, this is Umbro's speed boot, so we do expect to get a barefoot touch on the ball, and you get that to some degree. It does feel sharp and it does feel like you can definitely get connection with the ball, and the boot runs close to your foot, which is a fantastic thing when you're trying to get that barefoot connected feeling. However, because of just the general thickness and type of material that this Memory Flex is, you do have a little bit of padding in there. So there is an element where maybe the sting is taken out a little bit, which isn't going to be a bad thing. I'm not criticizing it for this at all. I'm just saying that it's not really as barefoot as anything you'd expect from the Ghosted or even the Mercurial. You're more in the same realms as the Furon, but maybe not quite as padded as that. Still barefoot, and the fit of this, which we'll get into later with how it's so close to the ball, is really what defines this as a speed boot, not necessarily the barefoot touch. On the whole, with the upper, especially for the price, which again we will get into later on, I'm pretty impressed. This has been a very enjoyable boot to wear. My only real criticism is maybe it can feel a little bit cheap. The materials used don't feel like they're materials from a very premium top-end boot. It doesn't feel like it's going to compete with a plus level Adidas boot or an elite level Nike boot. It definitely feels like it's more in the competition realm for something like a Mercurial Pro, which is completely fine because it's in that price point. But don't expect to get something that's going to rival a £250, €250 boot here. On the whole, pretty impressive though. So the upper is a big positive and a thumbs up from Boot Wizard. The outsole is an area that does need some work because of one fatal flaw. So we'll start by taking a look at it. It's a Pebax outsole and it's not super aggressive for a speed boot. You do get these kind of triangular or even bladed studs in the heel. You get one on the outside here and then some more kind of diamond or more aggressive studs up the top, but everything else is conical. But the main reason it's not particularly aggressive is because the studs are quite short. This is an excellent stud pattern for a hard ground or even an AG surface, if you ask me. Umbro do list this as an FG boot and it'll work fine on good FG pitches, but if it gets a little bit wet, I just don't think there's enough traction here, which again, when it's a speed boot, isn't really what you're looking for. But I don't have a problem with it. The stud shape, the stud patterning is good. The way that the studs are pushed towards the very toe of the boot is definitely a good thing, and it makes it feel that little bit more aggressive, pushes you onto your toes that little bit more. all good things. The problem here comes with the actual materials used, or I suppose how they're used. Pebax is a very common sole plate material, so this should work absolutely fine, but it feels like Umbro took a huge decision here, and they've done this with most of their boots recently to make the boots as light as possible. This is something Lotto were doing for quite some time, and Lotto have kind of moved away from that a little bit. They're still making light boots, but they're not quite crazy light anymore. Umbro have stuck with it. I believe that they've gone completely unnoticed for having boots that are as light as the Puma Ultra, 160 grams, and nobody's really talking about it. And we're talking about leather boots here as well. The Medusa 3 Elite is stupid light. So Umbro have really pushed the idea that they do fantastic lightweight boots. Most of the weight of any insole, of any boot, can be found in the outsole. And so the way that Puma have made this boot very light, because the upper is substantial, is by thinning out this area, which in itself is not necessarily a problem, provided you get the rigidity and stability you need in all the right places. The heel is good. I don't have any issues here at all. It's stable, it's fine. The top of the boot is flexible. Not really a problem. You don't get any kind of incredible spring back or anything like that. But the problem is that in order for me to show you the spring back in this, I'm having to really hold and support this boot here. The problem is that when you just try and apply a basic amount of bend and pressure to the boot, I've got a thumb in the back here, just to push it through, it bends all the way down here. Its natural bend point, the weakest point of the boot, is in the midfoot. So if I do this, the boot goes like that. When you apply this much tension, it shouldn't just default to a midpoint there. Like, you get a good bit of bend, but if I really want to push off with this boot, it kind of crumples up in the back here. Like, I shouldn't be able to basically bend this boot in half. Now, I don't suggest doing this. If you have a pair of these boots, you will damage it. I'm just doing it for the sake of kind of showing you what the problem is, that I shouldn't be able to do this with this boot. This is something that's synonymous with kind of fake boots that use poor materials. Now, it's nowhere near that bad, but it is noticeable when you're playing that it just loses structure at a certain point. When you really push off and you really accelerate and you're going in a straight line, it gets to a point and then like the whole thing just folds in on you. And it doesn't help itself because the heel lockdown's not bad, so it kind of pushes the whole thing into this folded issue. And this is easily solved. All it needs is some strengthening down the middle of the boot, and you can see they've tried to do it. This is a thicker section here. But take the Lotto Maestro 104 that I have kind of spoken about a few times. That has a whole BFC plate, which is a plastic outer, which runs all the way over the rear and midfoot of the boot to provide it with more structure, because without it, the sole plate would be too flexible and it wouldn't have enough structure. I feel like this needs something like that, or in simple terms, just stick some strengthening bars in it, and then there'd be no problems. And this would be a really solid outsole for an AG or HG pitch. Not the greatest here in Ireland on an FG pitch because the studs aren't quite long enough. So praise for the upper and some criticism for the outer, but there's definitely potential there. Let's talk value for money. Now, this is always a critical element to any review. How much do you have to pay for what you get? So here it's even more important because it is a top-end boot from Umbro, but you're not paying top-end prices. This is £150 when it is brand new and when it's not on sale. At the moment, you can pick it up for about £100, €110. I will leave some links down in the top comment and in the description so you can pick this up if you want to at the best possible price on sale. So bonus is, it is much cheaper than what you're going to buy even an Adidas 0.1 model for. It's cheaper than some of its other smaller competitors, such as that Maestro 104 that I mentioned. That is up at £170. So it's a really good price, and it's priced just above those Nike Pro level boots. So it's in that ballpark. So if you're looking at a Nike Takedown or an Adidas 0.2, something like this, you should consider an Umbro instead, because you're getting kind of their best technology to go up against some of Nike's and Adidas's takedowns. And I would make a solid argument that this is well in that realm. I would happily pick this up instead of some of the other takedowns that are on the market. The Ghosted 0.2 isn't bad, neither's the Predator 0.2, they're both okay. I would probably go out on a limb and say I prefer this to those 0.2 models, but that sole plate issue does bug me a little bit. When it comes to the Nike ones, I'd say you're kind of on par with what you're going to get from the GT Pro. The GT Pro might be slightly ahead. You have to come back to me on that. And then the only boot that really, from a takedown perspective, that is 100% no questions better than this is to pick up the Mercurial Vapor 13 Pro. I think that is a fantastic boot for the price that you pay. However, considering the prices that these can come down to, I think this is definitely an option worth considering. So if you're on a budget and you're looking at full price boots, then this isn't a bad option at all, because it comes up a lot cheaper than all of the other top-end boots from the other brands. And if you're looking on sale, you might be coming in under some takedown models, and this is going to perform better than a lot of those takedown models. You just have to work out what it is you're looking for. If you like what I've said about the upper and you like the sounds of that, especially how soft it is, the easier to break in, we're going to talk about the comfort in a second, great. And if you play on a hard ground pitch and you think that maybe the bend isn't going to be the biggest issue for you, maybe you're not looking for super aggressive traction, this could be well worth considering. Umbro on the right track and at the right price point, which for small brands is critical. It's kind of crazy calling Umbro a small brand. They were like the brand when I was a kid. Oh, I'm just old. Let's talk about weight. We already spoke about how Umbro have kind of positioned themselves as a brand that does very light football boots, and how some of that weight is definitely coming out of the sole plate. Let's see if it was worth it. What is the weight on these boots? These are in a UK 7.5, and they're coming in at 170 grams exactly, which is 10 grams heavier than the Puma Ultra, which is pretty much the lightest boot on the market. But this is lighter than the Mercurial, it's lighter than the X Ghosted. If a lightweight football boot, a lightweight speed boot is what you're looking for, then you definitely should consider this. It's very light, and you can feel like you don't have much on at all, but that slightly padded touch kind of reminds you that there is something behind your shots. It's a fairly nice combination, especially if that's what you're looking for. Okay, fit and comfort, we'll jump straight into sizing. Now, I know a lot of you have been following the channel for a little while, you kind of know my sizes and what I go for. I recently had some kind of foot problems, so I've had to adjust some things and therefore adjust the sizes of my boots. So kind of take this as the 0.1. So from here on out, this is kind of a new line in the sand for what my sizing is going to work out at. And in most things, I'm picking up a US 8 at the moment, just to give you a blanket idea of where I'm going. These particular boots I have in a US 8.5. So my advice for these, if you are looking to pick them up, is to go up half a size. So you're going up half a size from your regular size for these ones. And these run very close. Like, I don't think, there's no way I'd have got away with a US 8, which is the same size that I'm wearing in the Mercurial now. It's the size I have the Puma Ultra in. It's the size that I have the X Ghosted in. This particular boot, not a hope. I'm pretty close to the end. It's very tight fitting. So up half a size is my advice there. In terms of width, there is actually plenty of width through the boot, and because of that shallow lacing system, you have a lot of room in the forefoot of the boot. So if you have a wide forefoot, even a wider midfoot, this could well be a boot worth considering. It wraps around your foot quite nicely because of how that memory inside, that memory mid layer works, but at the same time, there's definitely enough width in here for most people. I would be pretty confident that unless you have an insanely wide foot, that this is probably going to do a job for you. And if you have a regular size foot, you're not going to complain at all. Maybe a very narrow foot, you'd have a problem, but honestly, I think this is a boot that's going to be okay for most people. For me, Umbro constantly making strides in the right direction towards being a very viable brand that you should pick up, and they've done a lot of work to give you a good quality boot at a very good price, and I can't really knock that. My one thing to change, the solidity in the sole plate. So if we get that on a new generation, or maybe it's a minor running change, probably quite a large running change to be fair, or hopefully it's something that's a different on the elite level model. I'll try and get a review out for that as well, so do get subscribed to the channel to pick it up. I think Umbro are definitely working in the right direction here, and I'll be very excited to see where they go next. Do let me know what you think. Do you think that this is a good enough boot? Would you definitely take a gamble on something like this at a good price point, or are you still stuck in those big three brands? That's all from me here at Boot Wizard today. Do remember to like the video, share the video, subscribe to Boot Wizard, and if you can, please head over to patreon.com/bootwizard and support the channel. It's really, really helpful, and it basically keeps the channel going. Please head over there if you can, take a look, and more important than anything, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Useless.